Hello there, friends. Welcome to BJJ Meditations. This is BJJ Meditations episode number 74. I'm your host, Joe from Jersey, from the Jersey Shore, not the Jersey Shore of ill repute, a very different Jersey Shore, which, if you're from other parts of the country, what's the difference? Other parts of the country you might not be familiar with. I was in a lovely town called Beach Haven for a week with my family, sort of like an annual thing that we do with our friends. They have a beach house that's been in the family for generations, and every year they ask us to come down, and we have a fantastic time there. It's one of those places where there really isn't a whole lot to do, but be there. It affords a lot of time to think, a lot of what I like to call negative space. And this is something my wife and I have done for years. We've taken sort of the big beach vacation every summer, and it used to look a lot different when we didn't have a small child. It used to look a lot like getting on the beach at 10:30, drinking all day, and leaving the beach at sunset. Not doing a whole lot of much else. Maybe getting some surfing in, maybe not, depending on how much beer has been consumed and what the waves are doing. But the Northern Atlantic isn't exactly the best surfing body of water in the summertime. It tends to get more interesting as the weather cools down. But it's different when you have a small child, particularly a small child who's still learning how to swim and is mobile and wants to be in the water every second possible, because you're just doing everything you can to keep your eyes on him and to keep him from dying. So yeah, it's not as relaxing as it once was, but it certainly forces you to pay more attention, to be more present, both in the sense of keeping my son alive and in the sense of savoring all the small moments. This is something that's been coming up for me a lot as I explore photography as an art form. In my episode Seeing More Clearly, I talked a bit about this, but I feel like I'm practicing the art of paying attention. It's very meditative, and it's illusory in the sense that you're trying to preserve a moment that is that will never last, but it is forcing me to look more closely at things. And I think that's generally the point that I have for this episode. The time away has forced me to look more closely at things, particularly, when you have a small child and you're on vacation, you're busy all the time, but in those rare unoccupied moments, the fact that there's some negative space there forces a point of clarity that I feel wouldn't be there otherwise. For me, these points of clarity or these moments of clarity came a lot of times when I was walking to or from the beach, usually to like get something from the house or to get something or to go to the bathroom or whatever, to get more sandcastle supplies. I would have these rare moments where I was by myself and I would pose questions to myself. And a lot of times I was hoping for some sort of clear insight, some sort of life-changing realization. But of course, this didn't happen because life doesn't work that way. But what came up for me in these moments was a notion I've been fiddling with on this podcast for a while now. And it's this idea of being true to yourself, being who you really are. And how, in the Alan Watts sense of things, that there really is no real self-improvement. Sort of everything we do to improve ourselves is artifice in a way. What we're really about when we say somebody has truly improved is it's an act of essentialism. They've discarded the things that are not true to them. They've discarded the affectation that other people have put upon them. And, in some ways this is true. Obviously, the idea falls apart when you look at something like, let's say, weight loss, right? Like you have a goal to lose weight. That is sort of a thing where you can change yourself, right? But I'm talking more about psychological domains here. So I was asking myself these questions through this lens of like, how can I be true to myself? The first question I was asking often on this vacation was, how do I show up for my son in a way that makes him a great person? Because I can only be myself in terms of my relationship to him as a father. And I feel very strongly these two polarities inside of me. There's sort of the tyrant, and then there's the leader who's like sort of asleep at the wheel. the fool, maybe. And it's my job as a father to navigate these two polarities skillfully in order for my son to learn and become the person he needs to become. So I'm striking this balance of how do I give him discipline and order while at the same time not crushing the essence of his being. I think I was crushed a little too more often as a child, and certainly as a young adult, and not necessarily given as much freedom. And this is a dynamic that I was thinking about often and talking about a bit with my friend Gene, who came with us. He was observing how Cormac was behaving with this other little girl who was there in the house with us, and he said to me at one point, Cormac is testing you. He's testing you, and he's looking to see what you're going to do. And I think that he would benefit from more of that sense of order. I don't think, he said this specifically, which was very interesting. He said, I don't think you're going to go too far like maybe your parents did. You learned that lesson the hard way. But I think you can push him a little bit more. So that was a major sort of point of pain for me, thinking about that. And it continues to be a priority for me of thinking about, like, how do I strike this balance? How do I discard everything that is not me in terms of who I am for my son in a way that is optimally beneficial for him? And of course, this has obvious implications. This idea of essentialism of the self has obvious implications for competitive jiu-jitsu. And I was thinking a lot about that too, with these two competitions I have coming up. What elements of my game are the most pressure tested? When the chips are down, what works and what doesn't? What can I do without thinking about it? And, the last point is what gives me confidence. Like, there are certain things that if I do in a match, it emboldens me and it propels me forward. And these questions were coming up for me while I was away. And also when I returned to the mats for the first time on Sunday, we have sort of this competition prep class going on Sundays that Shane is hosting. And it's a real gauntlet to pass through. There's a point where, like, one of the people who's been doing the class was debating whether we are overtraining and whether that is detrimental to skill acquisition. And I sort of frame skill acquisition and psychological, we'll call it resilience training, as two separate things. And I think a lot about how most of us, if you're like me, you're kind of a hobbyist. You're not a professional competitor. You don't have a ton of experience competing. Maybe you're drawn to competition. And the thing that breaks or has broken for me more often than anything else in the heat of battle is my will. It's not skill acquisition. You spend all this time acquiring skills leading up to competitions, and then, to me, the time gearing up for the competition after you've made the decision is about strengthening, conditioning your body, but also strengthening your psychology. And I think there's a ton of utility to those sessions where you just want to break and you can't, or maybe you've already broken, but you just have to keep going. I derive a real amount of confidence from that. I think a lot of people do too. But in those sessions where every ounce of sweat has been wrung from your body, what do you go to? What are you pulling people into? For me, it was just automatically, I'm pulling people into closed guard and immediately starting to flank and go to their back. And it's working. I could see the results. I'm able to accomplish what I want to accomplish. And I can do it without thinking about it because I've just patterned it into my physiology so many times. And seeing that data, that feedback, gives me confidence. So I've taken this attitude in my jiu-jitsu now as I go into these two competitions of, I'm just going to do whatever is core to me. That might be pulling closed guard. That might be working X guard. That might be doing some funky shit I have yet to debut in competition. Maybe we'll get the chance to see it. But it has to be an expression of who I am. Otherwise, I'm not being true to myself, and I can only be myself. Then there was this question of, okay, so how do I take this and apply it to life off the mats? What does this look like? I've kind of been a jack of all trades for a long time. I don't know if I'm a master of none. I think I've achieved mastery in a few things, but I do a lot of seemingly disparate things. And And I derive a lot of creative fuel from that process, and I derive a lot of satisfaction from it too. Like, I have this podcast, I have my work with Josh and Emily, I have a lot of professional writing work that I do. You know, I'm not opposed to taking on new things either. I've done this throughout the past. I have the school, you know. There's a certain entrepreneurial bend to me. But what am I doing out of a feeling of obligation? And what am I doing out of a sense of love? There are certainly things that I do out of necessity. I do it to put a roof over our heads. I do it to put food on the table. I do it to give Cormac the financial security that I didn't necessarily have growing up. And I do all those things from a place of love. It's all about love. Love is core to it. Love of my son, love of my wife, love of our life together. But do I love doing those things? It's a great question. What would I do if money were no object? I was thinking about this on one of those walks back from the beach, and the thing that came up most clearly for me was right. You know, if I were all squared away financially and I didn't have to do a thing for money, I would just write. I would pour my heart into writing fiction, as I have done in fits and starts over the years. I have a novella and 2 books that have never seen the light of day. The second book I think is pretty good. The first one's salvageable. The novella really needs to be just like a short story. But I would put everything into that. And it's interesting because in terms of writing, that's probably what I'm doing least right now. Isn't that funny how that works out? The other thing I came up was coaching people, coaching students at the school. I feel like I have so much room to grow as a coach, and that's partly why I'm investing so much in competition right now, is to be battle tested. Something Josh says, and I really agree with, there's no substitute from the informed experience that comes from being a competitor in the arena. And while I'm choosing to believe I can win, and I want to win, and I'm training with more clarity and focus and drive than I ever have been before, the point is to be in the arena. The point is to be there. And I'm trying to bring a new level of presence and poise to being there. And when I think about I can only be myself, that's me. That's me in my purest form. I'm never going to be the chest thumping guy. I'm never going to be the guy who has absolute certainty in my ability to win. I certainly think I can win, especially if I train hard enough. There's no bravado there. It's more about experiencing it, seeing what's there, going and having the experience and integrating it. And that's kind of how I'm looking at these 2 upcoming competitions. And, you know, interestingly, the trepidation and anxiety that I normally feel is not there this time. I'm sure day of, I'm going to wake up, I'm going to be a ball of nerves. Night before, or maybe 2 days before, I'll be a ball nervous. But like right now, I don't know. I've competed so many times. It's getting to the point where it feels just like putting on my shoes, and that's always what I've wanted. But of course, it's so much more than that. It's so much more enriching, so much more educational. And that's why I'm so fully invested in it. But lots of stuff for me to think about here. Things I'm going to continue to ruminate on. But I think that the overall point of this episode is that there is an ultimate utility of not doing. None of these things that I just described to you would have come up per se, or may have come up indirectly or inefficiently had I just been going about my everyday waking life. I needed to be in negative space. I didn't train any jiu-jitsu while I was away. I did some strength and conditioning. I went for some runs and bike rides, stuff I haven't done in a while and enjoy doing. I shook things up. But I gave myself the permission to not train, to not push, to take a step back and to see what's there. And really provided me with, like I said, not some sort of life-changing realization, but critical stepping stone type questions that need to be considered. And those questions would not have arisen had I not taken that step into negative space. Negative space gives us the ability to question and the time to question what we're doing. You know, otherwise we're just doing mindlessly, perhaps. So I guess what this is all about is, how do I bring more mindfulness into everything I do from here on out? How do I summon this at will? How can I do it without a week at the beach? We'll see. Thanks for listening, folks. Hope you enjoyed this episode of BJJ Meditations. Got some interesting things in the works, which I'm eager to tell you about, but I'm going to wait to tell you about them until the foundation has set. But yeah, I'm back with no plans, no future plans for any time off from the podcast. I'll let you know if that changes, but I'm committed to being here for you, and I appreciate you for giving me your time and attention. Thank you very much, and we'll talk next week.